We are anonymous. We are not a government. We are not a political party. We are not a television network selling war like primetime entertainment. We are a voice in the dark, a mask against propaganda, corruption, and power without accountability. And today, Anonymous exposes a story that cuts through the noise. An Iranian missile strike hit valuable U.S. aircraft in Saudi Arabia, injuring American service members and exposing the ugly truth behind Donald Trump's reckless war posturing. According to the original broadcast, U.S. Central Command released new video showing American strikes on Iran continuing, while Trump tried to present himself as both a strongman and a peacemaker at the same time. He bragged about progress in negotiations with what he called a new and more reasonable regime in Iran, while also threatening to destroy Iran's energy infrastructure if Tehran did not make a deal soon. That contradiction tells you everything. Trump always wants to play both roles at once, the man of war and the man of peace, the destroyer and the deal-maker, the arsonist and the firefighter. But behind the performance, the region keeps burning. Fox framed the situation as a success story for Trump, saying joint U.S.-Israeli operations were taking a serious toll on Iran. Trump claimed the U.S. had bombed 13,000 targets so far, government and military targets, and he boasted that negotiations were moving along very nicely. He said many more targets had been destroyed that day, calling it a big day. That's how Trump talks about war, like a man reviewing a real estate project, not a commander speaking about human consequences. He talks about bombs the same way he talks about construction schedules, deals, ratings, and applause. No seriousness, no moral weight, just ego wrapped in patriotic branding. The broadcast then turned to the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical waterways on Earth. Officials said negotiations would focus heavily on Iran's attempts to threaten shipping there. Trump claimed Iran would allow 20 ships to pass through as a so-called sign of respect. At the same time, he was still weighing more military action to protect America and its allies. So once again, the message was chaos disguised as strategy. Trump wants credit for diplomacy while standing on a pile of threats. He wants to look tough without ever admitting that his own escalation is helping drive the crisis deeper. Then came the talk of ground operations. The segment said the Pentagon was preparing for a possible operation involving thousands of additional troops arriving in the region. When Trump was asked directly whether he was considering boots on the ground and whether he would do it without Congress, his answer sounded exactly like what you would expect. Vague bragging, vague power talk, and another round of self-congratulation. He said the U.S. had tremendous numbers of ships over there and claimed he was ahead of schedule with Iran. Ahead of schedule. Think about that phrase. Ahead of schedule for what, exactly? A wider war? More dead Americans? More regional collapse? This is what Trump does. He reduces global catastrophe to the language of a vanity project. The broadcast suggested one possible goal of putting troops on the ground would be to eliminate Iran's ability to build a nuclear weapon by reaching the uranium Iran still has. Jennifer Griffin described that as an extremely dangerous and labor-intensive operation. She said the Pentagon was preparing for weeks of possible ground operations, not necessarily a full invasion, but raids involving special forces. According to the report, 3,500 sailors and Marines with the 31st Marine Unit had arrived in the region. Another 2,000 Marines with the 11th Expeditionary Unit were on the way, and 1,500 paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne had also arrivarrived, giving CENTCOM more options. In other words, This was not just rhetoric anymore. Troops were moving. Assets were moving. The machinery of escalation was already in motion. And then came the detail that matters most. Fox said Iran struck an airbase in Saudi Arabia on Friday, injuring 12 U.S. service members, with 2 Americans in serious condition. At least 1 U.S. refueling plane was hit and caught fire. But the real shock was this: a highly valuable U.S. Air Force command and control plane, worth roughly $500 million, and one of only a very small number in the American inventory, was also hit in a direct strike. The report described it as a flying command center, a critical aircraft that gives U.S. forces a picture of the battlefield. That is not a symbolic target. That is not random damage. That is a serious blow against one of the most sensitive and valuable categories of U.S. military assets in the region. And that is where Trump's fantasy of control starts to collapse. Because while he was talking tough, while television hosts were praising progress, while everyone in the media ecosystem around him was trying to frame the conflict as another show of American dominance, the reality was much uglier. Iran was still able to hit deep inside Saudi Arabia. U.S. service members were still wounded. Critical American aircraft were still damaged. A supposedly overwhelming display of power still failed to prevent a direct strike on high-value U.S. assets. That is not strategic mastery. That is the exposure of weakness beneath the swagger. The report then pushed an even more explosive allegation. Because the base was deep inside Saudi Arabia, Fox suggested Iran may have received targeting assistance from Russia. The segment cited comments from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who reportedly told Fox that Ukraine had intelligence showing Russian satellites photographing military facilities that Iran later targeted. Specifically, the claim was that Russian satellite images were taken of Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia on March the 25th. And 2 days later, U.S. assets on the tarmac. They were hit in a direct strike. If true, that would mean this conflict was even more dangerous than it already appeared. Not just Iran and the United States, not just Saudi Arabia and Israel, but Russian intelligence potentially feeding the targeting cycle. Whether every detail is proven or not, even the allegation alone shows how fast Trump's politics of intimidation can spiral into something much bigger and much more dangerous. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo then came on and said a ground operation to seize or remove enriched uranium was probably necessary, though incredibly difficult. He said U.S. and Israeli intelligence about the uranium's whereabouts was very good, but admitted such a mission would carry major risks. Things go wrong, he said. Aircraft break, operations fail, people die. And that is the one honest part of the conversation, because beneath all the chest-thumping and television certainty, even Trump's own allies know that once you start pushing toward direct operations inside Iran, you are gambling with disaster. The discussion then shifted into the usual claim that the true success of the campaign was being hidden from public view because Iran was under blackout conditions, and the world was not fully seeing the devastation inflicted by the U.S. military. That is one of the oldest tricks in the book. If victory is not visible, they tell you it is because the enemy is hiding how badly they were beaten. If the results are unclear, they ask you to trust the people who sold the war in the first place. Trump thrives in that environment because confusion is his oxygen. In confusion, he can call failure success. In confusion, he can call escalation peace. In confusion, he can keep selling himself as the strong leader, while reality keeps proving otherwise. Fox also repeated that Trump supposedly did not want regime change in Iran. But then Pompeo basically described a version of regime change anyway, saying Iran's behavior would have to change, its terror proxies would have to be cut off, and its ability to threaten the region would have to be broken. So let's be honest about what this is. Trump says one thing publicly and pursues something far more dangerous in practice. He says no regime change, then surrounds himself with people describing outcomes that sound exactly like regime change. He says America first, but what he delivers is permanent instability, broader confrontation, wounded troops, and a region pushed closer to the edge. The segment ended by widening the threat picture even more. There were concerns that Iran could target Americans elsewhere, including civilian-related targets. Then came the cyber angle. A group allegedly tied to Iran claimed responsibility for hacking Kash Patel's email in retaliation for FBI action against several domains. The FBI said no government information was taken, but the message was clear. This conflict was not staying confined to missiles and airstrikes. It was stretching into cyber operations, civilian fear, and the possibility of wider retaliation. Pompeo said he had long worried about Iran's cyber capabilities, though he claimed the U.S. security apparatus had done strong work to prevent more damage. So here is the truth, beneath all the scripted confidence. Trump can talk about being ahead of schedule. He can boast about destroyed targets. He can threaten more destruction while pretending to offer peace. But none of that changes what happened. American troops were injured. A U.S. refueling plane was hit and burned. A $500 million command and control aircraft was struck. And the conflict he helped inflame keeps expanding across land, air, sea, and cyberspace. That is the real story. Not strength, not control, not strategic genius, just recklessness, ego, and escalation dressed up as leadership. We are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forgive lies disguised as strength. We do not forget the cost of political vanity in times of war. If you want more stories like this, share the video, leave a comment, and stay awake.